Matthew, or Matt Nyman, welcome to the Decentralized Podcast. Great to have you on board.
Petri, it's great to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. I think for those folks who aren't familiar with you, can you maybe just give us a quick intro of yourself and your background?
So very quickly, I am a lawyer specializing in crypto digital assets. I've been doing that for about 6-7 years. Before that, I was in fintech, or the kind of a more conventional side of fintech, in-house. Happy to talk a bit about that later on. I moved to Dubai at the end of last year.
Looking forward, and we're going to dig into the Dubai side. Where I actually wanted to start out is because you've got that fintech background, and you've actually seen fintech companies more Web2 experience. And I think what we're seeing a lot of now is some of the Web3 founders think they're different. You know, we're in crypto, it doesn't apply to us, but it's still a fintech company almost. So with all the founders that you've worked with over the years, what have been some of the mistakes you see them making? What are the things they don't consider early on they should be thinking about?
Wow. Well, I've been working with founders my whole career, which has been quite a long one already. And like I said, started out in fintech. Well, actually, I trained in TradFi. So I trained at a traditional finance law firm in London, Allen Overy, and I'd studied law traditionally, and I'd done economics and finance, so very traditional. And then I moved into fintech. Happy to talk about why I ran away to join the circus. And right from my first job as a newly qualified lawyer, I was working for and alongside the founders and the board. And that was a relatively mature company for the fintech space. And then as my career progressed, I was working for smaller and smaller or newer and newer organizations. Some of them were bigger, some of them were smaller, but newer and newer, and working more closely with founders. And I think what I've learned is that although I'm not a private client lawyer, so I'm advising the business and working for the business, not the individuals, where it's a founder-led business, actually the personal objectives, personal styles, risk appetite, and ways of working are just crucial, because a founder will and has the right to, within reason, run their business as they want to, and so that's been very important. So the question, which I've forgotten now, was, what are some of the mistakes? I think you said
Mistakes, challenges, things they don't think about.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, in the crypto space and in the fintech space in the early days, from a legal perspective, people talk about the Wild West, right? And obviously there's some negative connotations to that. But at the beginning of fintech, things were very unclear. A lot of businesses and founders imagined or believed that they were running a technology business rather than a financial services business. So that was a common theme. I don't want to say it's a mistake, right? Because you come to a space with the knowledge that you have and you do your best. But that was certainly something in the early days of fintech where the law and the regulations were not really designed and hadn't anticipated the new business models that the technology enabled. And so because the business models were technology enabled, the focus was on the technology, it was very easy and understandable to view the business as a technology service, and therefore not to view it as a financial services business. And so that was a sort of, as I say, constant theme. And I had, worked with a couple of businesses that were going through the realization, and in a couple of cases, I was, the part of the realization. By the way, guys, this is actually financial services business as well as a technology business, and sometimes a bit of a painful pivot of the business to being, less like a tech startup and more like a bank, which wasn't always a lot of fun for everybody who signed up to join a tech startup. And the same I was saying about the early days of crypto. There wasn't really certainly look at Bitcoin, which is of course the prototype, the ideal that everyone still has in their mind. It wasn't obvious that there were at that time any sort of major legal concerns or certainly any regulatory concerns. And so there was a time where even where there, as crypto and as decentralized projects increased their sort of business footprint, because it's, we talk about being technology agnostic, and that's generally true. It's the business aspect, it's the business relationships, or the personal relationships between people, between companies. Those are the ones that create the legal and regulatory issues, not the technology itself. And so in those early days, even as they increased that sort of business footprint or social footprint, so you had Bitcoin, then you had obviously a couple of other iterations, then you had Ethereum, there was an ICO. Of course, it was arguable at that time, people did argue, was that a securities offering? Were there certain contractual legal issues that would have existed between people who participated in the ICO? Then you had the Ethereum Foundation. And then as the space expanded and that, again, sort of business or real world footprint expanded, there were more and more the legal sort of surface area increased. But coming from where it did, it was very easy to think, well, Bitcoin, Satoshi didn't need any lawyers, and Ethereum didn't seem to have any major legal concerns, so I should be able to do what I'm doing, right? And it was kind of slowly, and so I think a lot of people who were around at the beginning, and I've been, privileged to work with some of the early people, again, quite understandable that they would think, well, don't really need to be too worried about the legal issues. So I don't think I want to say that that those are, and those have been the big, again, not mistakes. I don't want to say the mistakes because it's an evolving situation, but that's been the major cause, I think, of some difficulties and friction, where the on the legal side, if that makes sense.
No, makes perfect sense. I think that it's so interesting. I mean, you talk about this being evolving and changing over time, and you've definitely seen legislators, people writing laws, as well as regulators figuring this out, and then everyone else over time figuring it out as well, sort of educating themselves. Okay, let's try this. You see certain jurisdictions, okay, this might not fit, it doesn't work. I know you've sort of looked at, over time, the evolution of legislation and how it's gone. So what have you seen with that evolution of legislation, sort of from when you started working on this to now?
Yeah.
And then if you're willing to venture a guess, where do you think we might be heading with the legislation?
Wow. Yeah, well, it's just been, and continues to be, just absolutely fascinating. It's just fascinating as in some senses, an experiment. Now, of course, where I have clients with billions at stake, of course, we don't see that business as an experiment, but if you look at the space overall, right, we're just seeing where it goes, and that's the same in terms of law and regulation. I don't think it's a secret that we're finding our way, and I mean, that's one of the things that I love about working in this space. That was the reason I went into fintech from TradFi at the start. It was new, it was uncertain. There was a lot of working things out as we went, and I've been fortunate to see the evolution of the law and the regulation for crypto, from the start. Most closely in the UK, where I was based, and in the EU, because we were still in the EU when I started. Actually, my entry point into crypto was through working on the Financial Markets Law Committee, which a lot of people listening probably haven't heard of, but it's a legal committee that was spun out of the Bank of England and looks at areas of legal uncertainty affecting the financial markets. And it was very, very, I think, open-minded and far-sighted of them back then when I joined to start looking at digital assets. And the first project that I was involved in was a working group on governing law and jurisdiction for distributed ledger technology. Mm-hmm. And that was my wake-up call to crypto professionally, and that's being involved in that basically sparked my move into crypto full-time. And it was very apparent I was very much the junior member and the new kid on the block on that at that time. But it was very interesting watching the great and the good of the legal profession getting to grips with this new thing. But what became very apparent to me was it really is new. And it's not very often that something really new comes along. In a legal and in a business perspective. Obviously, we've seen, we've got technological developments all the time, but if you look at business, we're still doing the same sorts of business that we've been doing for thousands of years. You buy clothes, you buy bread, you lend some money. These things have been here around, forever. And it's very unusual that a completely new or business model or financial model comes along. And I could see instantly that the challenge was enormous. And then again on the regulatory front, I think it was Libra, the Facebook Libra. Mm-hmm. Was that the original name or was that the new name? I get confused because they changed the name. But Facebook Libra, the stable coin, right, which was going to be based on a basket of currencies and established in Switzerland, and that was the thing that rattled central banks and regulators all around the world, and that's what woke them up to crypto being a potential risk and threat to the established order generally in the financial system. And that's what sparked regulations around the world, including what we now know as MiCA. And so again, in that group, I think it must have been about 2018, I may be wrong on that, but around that time, we saw the first consultation from the EU, a sort of pre-consultation, and we studied that for quite a long time, and we sent in responses. And again, I saw, that basically trying to fit crypto into the existing investment securities framework, into MiFID, right? So you've got MiFID for investments and securities, got MiCA for crypto, and I could see straight away that that was not the ideal, because it's new. It's not it's not the same. It's not same risk, same regulatory outcome, but the technology is different at all. The technology is different, which enables a different whole set of business models and business relationships with different risks. But I've never sort of thrown stones, if that's the right metaphor. I've never criticized, and certainly don't want to criticize now publicly, because the people who, some of whom are my friends and colleagues, right, on the legal side and the regulatory side, were doing their best. And I had an opportunity. I was sort of, had a front row seat there, and I couldn't figure it out. I mean, when I would sit, and obviously you only have so much time, but I would, do some prep for these working group meetings, and I would sit there for, on the tube on the way down thinking, how can we create a new legal and regulatory framework for this stuff? And that's really hard to do. I wasn't able to come up with anything, at least in the time that I had available. And so, it hasn't worked out perfectly. Again, I've been waffling on, and I've forgotten again what your question was. Have I answered it, or have I?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think you've
gone
sort
off
of
the
run
rails?
through, where we started and where we are with regulations now. People getting into it and developing it over time. I think it's a very interesting question because, as you say, this is all new. And it is completely brand new. So there are certain instances where you can say, this is like this. And I think that's where we've seen people trying to do it. Oh, this is all just securities. These are all just whatever regulation you think they fall in. But it is so unique and different in a lot of respects where, some of these things aren't like anything else that you've seen before.
Yeah, and it's just gone in all sorts of different directions. And, some of the legal policy, if you like, because ultimately law is a reflection of policy. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, well, at least in most countries that we deal with, things like crypto being considered property, which is considered sort of major victory in the legal community and some of the business community, then sort of creates other problems when you're dealing, for example, with custody. So it's all and depending where you are in the space, you will have a different view of where you think you want the law and the regulation to go. And I've always had, and we at CMS, at my firm, we have a very, very broad client base, which ranges from decentralized projects, layer ones, layer twos, dApps, through to centralized, CeFi, so exchanges and custodians and lenders and market makers and so on, then all the way through to, especially now, increasingly institutional financial institutions, and then various other corporates and businesses along the way. And they're all going to have very, very different commercial objectives, and to the extent that anyone can actually figure the thing out and work out where it's going to go and work out how they would like things to happen, right? You can end up in different places. So generally, I've sort of just tried to help where I can, and I haven't taken, and I've never sort of in the various forums that I've participated in law and regulation, I've never tried to push anything in one particular direction, because I don't know how it's going to turn out and what's for the best. And among my clients, they might have very differing or opposing views of how they want things to turn out. So I don't have strong opinions on what we should do. And your question about where it's going to go, I mean, like I said, I knew back in 2018, I think it was, that the law and the regulation was going to go in the way that most easily allowed us to fit the square peg in the round hole with the least difficulty, and we were going to kind of hammer it in as far as we could. That was just obviously what was going to happen. And like I said, no judgment, because I didn't come up with any better ideas either. So I think now what we see is huge institutional appetite forming, particularly around stable coins, particularly around tokenization. And the institutions have a certain need or desire for regulation which will suit them, and that's fine. And so I think that side of the market we can see is going to be, I think, much better served, because those institutions, and then also the kind of institutional players in crypto, the centralized parties and the market makers and the brokers and so on, they all have the resources, right, the time, the money, the expertise to really shape things in a way that's going to suit them and hopefully create a market that's functioning as best as possible. And then we'll obviously have to sort out how that relates to the, I guess, the kind of TradFi side of the market. So I don't know if that's, if I've set out so I can see how that, I think that's going to go. On the decentralized side, which is, I think, more up your street, I really don't know, because it's been explicitly, decentralized activity or decentralized finance has been explicitly carved out of MiCA, which we touched on. It's explicitly carved out. I must admit, because we've had a conference this week, I've not yet read but I will have by the time this podcast comes out, the UK's draft legislation, which came out 2 days ago. But last time, they published anything on that, again, DeFi was explicitly carved out, and it's similar in other places around the world. So that's really an open question, what happens there. So I'm not going to comment on that.
No, I think everyone's figuring it out. The decentralized stuff is interesting, and we'll get into some of the detail there. I think the next thing I'd like to get into is, we're in the UAE at the moment. You've recently moved here. It feels like there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of openness to business. Different free economic zones, different regulators. I know they recently brought out their Foundation Companies Act as well. So can you maybe give us a bit of a lay of the land of the UAE, what you're seeing here at the moment?
Yeah, well, how long have we got? Because the UAE is the United Arab Emirates. There are 7 Emirates, and the ones that are most prominent in our world and in finance and in business more broadly are, in no particular order, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and Ras Al Khaimah also is now starting to become relevant in this space. So we can boil it down to 3, but then you've also got the Dubai International Financial Center, which is the financial free zone in Dubai. You've got the Abu Dhabi General Markets, which is the financial free zone in Abu Dhabi. So that bumps it up again from 3 to 5. And then you've also got various financial free zones, free zones, economic, commercial free zones in Dubai. Although thankfully we've recently, there's recently been some regularization of that, because the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, which is the Dubai Virtual Assets Regulator, now has jurisdiction, as it were, over those free zones, aside from the Dubai International Financial Center. So it's a complex. It is a complex jurisdictions. It's difficult to say it's difficult to generalize about the UAE when it comes to sort of specifics. The UAE, some things we can say about the UAE in general before perhaps we get into some detail or not, is that it has been early and it has been open-minded and positive. I believe the ADGM, which is the Abu Dhabi Global Markets, was the first jurisdiction, the first regulator to set out a specific virtual assets framework, beating, I think, a couple of the European jurisdictions by a month or two. But at any rate, it was very early, and set out some, at least for the times, sophisticated guidance on how they would approach and regulate virtual assets. And I think they did that not out of a sense of fear, right, which is, I think, undeniably what motivated, for example, Micah talked about Facebook Libra. It's like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose control of the financial system and the currency. But they did that quite clearly on a as a sort of positive, entrepreneurial, if you like, move to encourage business innovation, but in a way that they're comfortable with, which makes sense. And similarly, VARA, the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, which is the first dedicated regulator for virtual assets, was set up in the same spirit. There wasn't, I don't think, an enormous, from a global perspective, amount of risk present in Dubai. So it wasn't about sort of clamping down on something. It was about creating a benign environment for the country to be able to benefit from this technology, from this business, to bring jobs and economic activity to the region. So I think that's just the overall intentions and spirit behind the legal and regulatory developments here. And for me, I think that's really important, just to understand why this is here in the first place and how it's being approached. And I think that is common to the UAE. So you can generalize at that level, and then each jurisdiction and regulator is approaching things in its own way, depending on the particular sort of risk-reward balance that is relevant, given their particular mix of existing business and then the aspirations that they have for the future.
Okay. And I know you guys are working with quite a few regulated entities, and regulated in crypto, I mean, that's almost a new concept. And I'm sure a lot of your clients are facing a lot of challenges, either with the application or compliance after they get licensed. What are you seeing with your clients and sort of being regulated at the moment?
Oh, wow. I mean, that is a big question. Yeah, I mean, we have gone, as you say, we've gone from in my time in this space, which feels like it's gone in, very quickly. But in the last few years, we've gone from there not being, in most places, any clear, obvious regulation. And then we had, AML regulation and registration, and now we have, again, the UAE and the jurisdictions in it, one of the first places to have, full regulation of these activities. And so going back to mistakes people make, and again, I don't think it's mistakes. It's about, having the knowledge that you have, but there is I think some people have, not fully understood how much things have changed. So I think in the UAE, people know and hear in the space, oh, it's a great place to do business, and it is. Not so long ago, crypto-friendly meant no regulation. Now I think crypto-friendly means regulation that's manageable and that works. And so that's something that I think part of my job is sort of explaining what the position is here. And that is still comes as a surprise to some people that actually, yes, it's a crypto-friendly jurisdiction, but it's actually more highly regulated right now than the UK. I do believe it's a more crypto-friendly jurisdiction than the UK, but it is also more highly regulated, which is a little bit of a paradox in a way, at least for some people. So we are also in an evolving situation. So things are changing all the time, and I'm sure they will continue to change and keep me very busy.
No, I think it's very interesting to see, especially that evolving part of it is, the technology changes, how things interact, consumer changes, so you have to have that, evolving and the regulator being flexible and being able to adapt. I think the other part where we've dealt with each other, and I think you phrased it elegantly earlier, is you've got the decentralized side of things. And with the decentralized side of things, you see the Cayman Foundation being used, a lot of teams sort of opting for that model. Can you maybe give us just a little bit of an overview of that structure? How does it work, and when it's appropriate for a client to look at that?
Sure. Well, I must admit, Petri, that I know you've had this podcast going for at least a year, possibly much longer, and I'm sure that in that time, you as an expert and some of your guests will have discussed the foundations and offshore structures much better than I could. So the Cayman BVI alongside an onshore, so that structure has now become conventional, which is very interesting to see, right? I'm sure you remember when that was essentially developed by principally, I think, funds lawyers and some corporate lawyers out in your part of the world. Let's do this, see if this works. And turns out it works. And now it's what everyone wants to do. And actually, I've seen over, having been and still am, I guess, an onshore lawyer rather than an offshore lawyer, although we have a global practice and we have a global firm. So, 4 years ago, when I joined CMS, we would speak to clients and say, yeah, actually, if you're going to do a decentralized project and you want to issue a token, the money laundering regulations have just come in the UK, so it's a risk if you issue a token, and certainly if you sell a token from the UK. So you probably need to find a different jurisdiction for that, and then also looking at the governance, and if you want to have a DAO, well, you need a foundation. You haven't got that in the UK. Well, the foundation was very new, right, in Cayman even back then. And sorry, just to digress, isn't it interesting that the foundation companies were developed in law around the world? I don't think it was Cayman that had the first one, was it? Singapore, or anyway, they popped up in various places, the foundation company concept, just at the right time for crypto.
I think what's interesting for me is it was supposed to replace trusts. So this is a very traditional finance wealth protection vehicle.
Yeah.
When they designed it, I think it came out in 2017. And then someone looked at the structure and said, well,
Yeah.
oh, this thing fits, it works,
Yeah.
and you can remove shareholders and you can have an ownerless structure.
Yeah,
So,
it's quite an amazing coincidence.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, So I was saying I've noticed. So that was initially 4 years ago, 5 years ago, explaining that, and also working with lawyers in Cayman and BVI to really understand it and to be able to work with them, and then explaining it to clients and then putting it all together, and then only sort of 2 or 3 years later, now clients come to us and say, "Oh, we want this structure, and can you set it up next week?" Right. So we've gone from it being this almost sort of miracle, right, that there was a structure that seemed to work really, really well when it was very difficult to find, in any other area, something that worked really well from a legal and regulatory perspective. And now it's just seen as normal, right, and it's taken for granted. So that's something that I've seen, and a lot of people now in the space, even if they've got no, again, founders who've not had any brushes with the law, right, or with lawyers, will know about that structure and know a lot about it. But there are some mistakes, I will say. I'm sure you've had people talking about this previously, but having that structure is not enough. You have to look at the staffing of that structure, the personnel. If you just set up a company offshore, but you are the director or the controlling mind and you're onshore, you haven't really achieved much from a regulatory perspective and also from a tax perspective as well. So that is definitely a mistake that I've seen a lot of people make, because the structure is known, but that's a pretty important detail, that you actually need to have independent, or certainly offshore at least, directors and governance for those offshore entities. Otherwise, they're not fully offshore from a tax or regulatory perspective. And that, I think, is probably the big one that we see, and that's just a very easy, it takes some time and some money, but it's technically an easy fix.
Yeah, well, you've answered the next question I wanted to ask, which is, what are some of the mistakes you see founders making with a foundation that they don't get? What would you say are some of the things that you see founders not understanding with the interaction between labs, the foundation, the community? Because that is also something, as you said, very new in terms of, now you've got token holders out here,
Yes.
a foundation in here, a labs
Yes.
company.
Yeah, I think it's, again, some of the really important details that go into that structure. So in the early days, it wasn't so well known that this structure and these entity types were available, and all the work, most of it was done by lawyers, and we would pay attention to all the details. And it took longer in the early days than it does now, because it hadn't been done so many times. And obviously we all, learn as we go. Now, because the structure is so well known, and because there are some great service providers, you know who you are, who can set those companies up out of a box, and literally at the click of a button, right? There are services that will set companies up for you around the world at the click of a button. But it's not enough just to have the structure. So I think you mentioned DAOs, right? That needs to be coded, if you like, into the constitutions of those companies, the articles of association, or the bylaws, or the regulations, whatever they're called in the jurisdiction. But that needs to be written up and thought through. Is it how do you want the DAO to work? And again, even if your DAO is a sort of copycat DAO, you still need to make sure that you have the right constitution. You then have to look at the governance of those entities. Do you have the right, if the supervisors have if there's a role for supervisors, are you going to have people that can actually supervise? What's the relationship between the onshore entity and the offshore entity? Having those contracts in place, looking at the tax aspects. And so I think it's almost become so easy to set up, or at least some aspects of it have become very easy to set up, that it's easy, totally understandable, right? Mistake for founders to think, oh, well, I can set this structure up at the click of a button. That must be all I need. So I think that would be the one, and the cost, right? So actually, when you do it at the click of a button, it could be in the sort of low thousands of dollars, and that's very attractive. And then actually, if you were to take care of all these details that I've mentioned, having the right constitution in place, having the right agreements, having the independent governance, you then see the cost of that going from single digits of thousands of dollars to double digits, or even potentially, could be tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how complicated and ambitious your project is. And I think that can be a real disappointment for clients.
Yep.
But there may be a time when actually all that can be done at the click of a button. Maybe someone's going to automate this. But I'm not aware that it's been done yet.
No, I mean, it's so challenging because each project is so different. I mean, we deal with clients from that very early stage. And as you say, you've got directors, supervisors, operators who can really help from the Cayman Islands. And there is a roadmap, and it's a path that we can walk clients down. But it also is very project specific. And I think one of the things, sort of to your point, that we always discuss with clients is, this foundation is completely independent. How are you going to fund this thing? You can't just sell tokens. How is this thing going to operate actually going forward? Because I think that's where I've seen the lawyers change a little bit as well. In the traditional fund space, it was very much, there's a cookie cutter, you set these up and you spin them out, but you don't deal with them that much after the fact.
Right.
And we're dealing with these things throughout their life cycle. So you've got up to token generation, entity being set up, but then you've got the whole life cycle afterwards. So I know you're also working with clients after that initial stage. What are you seeing people struggle with there? What's your day-to-day interaction there?
Golly, again, this is just huge because this just goes to, this is a rapidly evolving technology, rapidly evolving business. The applications are changing, the laws, the regulations are changing, everything's changing the whole time. That's what makes it so interesting, for me anyway. And because now the initial setup can be done, and even if you go for the sort of 5-star full service, right, doing everything right, it's easy to think, well, I've done it now. But yeah, as you say, it's not like a fund which just sits there as a box and gets audited once every couple of years and files a report once a year and sends up some dividends and does some redemptions. It's operating, and the needs of the protocol and the ecosystem which the foundation has been set up to serve will change. If there's a front end, or if there are other operations that need to be done, those are going to have changing needs, and so it needs to be a living structure, right? Not just fixed, and that's something where actually, I'm not aware that there is a kind of playbook like we have for the initial setup. So that's something that does require discussion with your lawyers and your tax advisors, and you've got to look at it from a finance perspective, and of course ultimately you've got to look at the needs. Is this keeping up with the needs of the ecosystem, whatever the the project that the structure serves. And I don't think there's any one answer to that, but I guess I would absolutely agree with you that that is something that needs to be kept under review, and you can't just kind of put the structure in a drawer and forget about it.
No, I think that's for, especially sitting as a director, it's having that open communication between you and the founders and the team, especially on the dev side, but then also on the community. What is the community doing? What are some of the demands? You might have a council actually working with those people. And then I think for teams, it's important to put individuals who are passionate about the space, but also understand it into those, independent governance positions.
Well, I would love to interview you about what you do. Maybe I should start up a podcast so that I have an excuse to, but I just think it must be absolutely fascinating having the ringside, well, not ringside, you're kind of in the ring, as it were, as a director or as a supervisor or a council member. And in my days in-house, when I was working in businesses, I can imagine that you are seeing, just day to day, a side of this that that I don't. So watch out for that invitation
for your podcast coming
Yeah,
up.
I really
Definitely.
think it must be a fascinating experience
I think
for you.
that's why we do it, and I'm sure this is why you practice this specific area of law. Is it's never a boring day. It's always interesting. You're dealing with that cutting edge, brand new things. Where when you come from a traditional background, I've got a traditional background where you can take that base layer of understanding, but then you have to actually apply your mind. It isn't just this is the way it's done and no questions asked.
Yeah.
It's really thinking about it every single time and working with people and very new technologies and new things. So I think that's the exciting part about it.
It absolutely is, and as professionals, right? Professionals are, I guess, not the geniuses, not the Da Vinci's, right? Or the Vitaliks, right? Or the Satoshis. We kind of help things along, right? And I guess as a professional, where you are advising, where you are serving, as a lawyer anyway, right? We serve our clients. It makes all the difference when they are people who are really incredibly bright, incredibly optimistic, creative people, and it's just a real pleasure to be able to work with and advise those people. And yeah, coming from a traditional background, that's what attracted me. Although interestingly now, with tokenization, right, stable coins, and tokenization of RWAs, we're now seeing the, I guess, convergence of, well, there's always been within the CeFi space a kind of fintech element, right? And then now with tokenization, we are seeing a basically convergence with TradFi. And so for me personally, that it's a really cool time, because started out in TradFi, ran away into fintech, then took the leap into crypto, and I think each time I thought that perhaps I might just be leaving it all behind, right? But now I can see it's all coming together. And so that is quite gratifying, because I feel like all the things that I've learned are now actually useful and can actually be applied in the work that I'm doing. So that's something that's really, really exciting at the moment.
Well, you've sort of answered the next question because we usually wrap up with two questions. The first question is, what are you excited about in this space at the moment?
Right.
So would you say that is almost that convergence of the two spaces?
That is what I'm personally excited about, because it just means that I can really bring everything that I have to the table, and that's, you know, fulfilling, and allows me to do the best job for my clients, because I've got experience in and knowledge in all of those areas, and I can bring them to bear. I think what I'm excited about in general in our space is, well, the same thing I think that's always exciting me about it, which is that it is this journey and this adventure, which frankly nobody knows exactly where it's going, and no one knows how it's going to end. But it does feel like we are seeing, having been a long time sort of in our own little corner of the world, we're now starting to see it break out of the box and go in all sorts of different directions. And I think that brings a kind of renewed, for me, that brings a kind of renewed energy, whether it's decentralized social networks, which was the fascinating topic of your last podcast episode that I listened to, or whether it's decentralized privacy, right, confidentiality layers, identity, and sort of tokenized identity. All these things are just new and exciting applications, which we're going to get to see develop. So that's what I'm excited about.
No, I definitely agree. I think there's so many new ideas coming out. I think one of the things that's been interesting to watch is there's almost a push-pull between the traditional principles that we all believed in decentralization, privacy, etc., but also this new cohort of people coming in, TradFi coming in, where you need, you know, certain regulations, KYC, AML, identity, etc. But hopefully between the two, we'll find the solutions that work. So you can have, you know, very easy onboarding, people who don't want to deal with a seed phrase and all those kinds of things, but still keep those principles of, you know, the core technology of privacy, security intact. So I hope we'll be able to get there. We don't only want to focus on the positive. So what would you say is concerning you at the moment and where we are with the space?
Well, I prefer to focus on the positive, but yes,
Definitely,
sometimes we have to beware of the negative, especially as lawyers. What am I concerned about? What am I worried about? I guess I'm worried that the bad actors and the naughty boys and girls of in this space, you know, as there are and ever will be, right? People who want to take advantage, and it is in certain ways, I think, a vulnerability. If people say, "Oh, you know, crypto isn't a particular money laundering risk because more money is laundered in fiat cash than in crypto," etc. And yes, absolutely, you know, if that's the case, then that case should be explained. But I think the nature of the space, right? We call it a space, right? We don't call it that. I don't know how many other areas of business or finance are called, you know, a space. And that's the thing, it's not just business, it's not just finance. It is an incredibly creative, vibrant, and in some senses still experimental combination of technology and business, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's more vulnerable to going bad, both in reality, because we have open communities, right? So it's very easy with good faith to join a community and contribute to it and benefit from it, right, in a decentralized network. But it's also very easy to go in and mess things up and rip people off. And then also from I guess a narrative and a public perception perspective, right, it's very, very easy to really to do something that's going to make us all look bad, right? So I think we are vulnerable. It's still very, very early, and therefore it's at risk, right, of being derailed
almost, yeah.
and pushed in the wrong direction. Like a young tree, whatever, can be easily uprooted, right? And we want to see it grow. And so I think I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic, but yeah, that's something that I'm concerned about. I hope we don't have another. Well, we all say we learned the lessons of FTX, and that things have cleaned up a lot as a result, which is true. But I hope we don't have another one. It would be nice if we didn't have too many scandals. So that's a negative. But I'm overall very optimistic and much more excited than I am worried about what's going to happen.
No, I mean, it's interesting. If you look at human nature, there's always going to be scandals and scams, etc. And I almost draw it back to traditional markets. If you look at the stock exchanges, for example, and how old they are and how long it took for them to be properly regulated, have this flowing process we know now, and our industry, how nascent and young we actually are in comparison. It's insane to think.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think we've only got a few minutes left, and what I'm about to start discussing is perhaps a whole other podcast. But what's incredible is how quickly things are developed.
Yes.
And what's also fascinating is that it's the time in our culture that this has all happened, right? Just thinking about what you just said, the stock market, right? The stock market started off really in London, right? And it was the biggest stock market in the world for the first 100, 200 years of its existence, right? Until I think New York took over in the last century. It wasn't regulated by the government with a regulator until the 1990s. I think you had the SFO, and you then, it was, first it was just people doing business, then it was self-regulating, and it wasn't until our lifetime that the government said, right, we are going to have a government regulator that's going to tell you guys what to do, right? So it was going for 200-300 years. And what's incredible is that we now, not say it's incredible, it's interesting. It's got good and bad parts to it, but we've got this whole new area of business and area of finance, which has grown up in the age of regulation, right? We now live in the age of regulation. So anything happens in the world, the first question in the Western world anyone asks is, what law can we make? What government regulator, government action can be put in place in response? I don't think that was the world that, for example, the stock market grew up in. If it was, maybe it never would have got off the ground. But that's another story.
No, definitely. And I think, would we have had the innovation and the financial innovation had we lived in the same era? Is a very interesting question. I know we could probably go for another hour.
Definitely.
Matt, this is a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. If people want to learn more, reach out to you, where's the best place to find you?
Best place to find me is in my office. That's where I am most of the time, in Dubai. We have a website, cms.law. You can find me on LinkedIn, Matthew Nyman. I almost never post on LinkedIn, but I am there. I'm on Telegram at Matthew_Nyman.
Perfect.
People can contact you and you can
Yeah.
put them in touch.
No, definitely happy to do that. Matt, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me.